You're trying to do well in a class and you get a bad grade. Okay, so you're in this little frame, you want to get a good grade, that isn't happening, you got a bad grade. Okay, what is it that's manifesting itself as the bad grade? Well, you could say, well, it's a C minus on a piece of paper. It's like, well, that's, really? No. That's the objective manifestation. You got a piece of paper with a C minus. The value-free proposition is that you've been delivered a piece of paper with a curve on it and a little, negative sign. Well, you think, well, that's what that is. Well, it's as dopey as thinking, well, here you got your failing grade, you go into the lab and you weigh it on a scale, and then you burn it and see what it was made of. It's like, well, why did I get so upset about that? It's just paper. It's like, no, that's not just paper. It's an entity that exists in a web of connections. The fact that it's signified by paper is almost completely irrelevant. What is it? The answer is, you don't know. And that's why when you pick it up, you get this paralyzed sinking feeling, because your limbic system is a lot smarter than your perceptual systems. And your perceptual systems say, well, that's a piece of paper, and your limbic system says, nah, for sure, dragon. Right. And so then you're sweating, and then maybe you put it away and you go play video games because, better the hypothetical dragon than the real dragon. And so instead you pull out the piece of paper maybe and you think, okay, why did I get this C minus? Well, that's a hell of a question, isn't it? It's like, maybe you're stupid. Well, that could be, or at least stupid compared to who you think you are. Like that's the real horror that's lurking there, right? It's like, oh, I thought I was kind of smart. That's a proposition of the highest order. I thought I was kind of smart. It's like, yeah, well, what about this C minus? It's like, well, that goddamn professor, right? That's the first thing. I've been attacked by a predator. That's the first response, right? So it's a nonsensical message. It's just delivered by someone evil and predatory. Well, that's, possible, but I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't go there first necessarily. So, but then say you don't go there. Okay, well, so what is this exactly? Do you not know what you thought you knew? Are you not who you think you are? Do you not work hard enough? Are your values not organized properly? Do you misuse your time? Are you in the wrong field? Is the way you're construing your life completely inappropriate? Are you acting out what your parents wanted you to do and you're pissed off about it, so you're only running at 40% to spite them, despite the fact that they're paying $25,000 a year for your education? Because that's a fun game. Yeah, I'll go do what you want me to do, but I'll fail. But not completely, because then that wouldn't cost you very much. I'll just fail a little bit so that you have to spend all that money forcing me to do what I don't want to do, but you'll never get to escape from it. And then every time we interact, I'll stab you in various ways that you don't quite understand, just to show you how irritated I am that I happen to be acting out the destiny that you've put forward for me. So maybe that's part of the dragon, right? And then that pulls in the whole parent thing. And these are bottomless pits often. When you're in the world and something objects to you, something that matters objects to you, then in the entire unrealized world is in that thing that objects. It's all tangled up inside it. That's why it's the great dragon of chaos. It's everything that's outside of your conceptual structure. And what is that? It's everything that lurks outside of your walled city. And it's manifested itself like the snake in the garden. And the easiest thing to do is say, I'm not having anything to do with that. But the problem with that is, well, you get your C minus and you don't do anything about it. Maybe you're a little bitter and more resentful and your study habits get a little worse. So the next time you get like a D plus, and then you collect a bunch of Fs, and then you stop going to school, and then you stop showering, right? Then you end up jumping off the bridge. And so that's how the dragon eats you when you don't pay attention to it. And so it's no bloody wonder that people avoid, It's really no wonder that they avoid, because error messages contain within them the implicit world. Now, the upside of that is, well, they contain within them the implicit world. And the world isn't all negative. And so maybe you get your C minus, and that's actually the best gift you ever got, because somebody finally took you and went, whack, clue in. And so you take that apart and you think, oh, I don't know how to write. I don't know how to think. I've never read anything in my life. My study habits are abysmal, like maybe I'm working at 2% efficiency, which is probably, I would suspect that, some of you aren't doing that, but I bet there's 30 to 50% of the people in the room are working at 2% efficiency. It's like, that's so to find that out is so optimistic. I mean, if you're barely hanging in there but you're only working at 2%, you might imagine what you could have as a life if you're working at like 50%. So the C minus can be the best gift you ever had, and that's the gold that the dragon hoards, right? That's exactly what that means. And so, well, so you're moving from point A to point B in your little circumscribed world. You've made everything invisible, and as long as that works, then your theory's good enough. It's accurate enough, it's true enough, you're in your little paradise. But if something comes up and objects, well, that's where your character is tested fundamentally. That's the character test. It's like, what do you do with messages of error? And that's a tricky issue. Okay, so here's a solution to that. Here's what not to do. I am a bad person. I got to see myself. I'm a bad person. I might as well just go jump off the bridge. It's like, no, that's not good, because what that means is that every time you try to learn something, you're going to make a mistake, because what do you know? So you're going to make mistakes. And if the rule is every time you make a mistake, you're going to go jump off the bridge, then that's not a useful problem-solving strategy. And so when you make a mistake, you don't get to beat yourself to death with a club. It's a bad strategy, and you'll have your internal tyrant in there who's perfectly happy about doing that. That's the, overactive superego that Freud talked about. Maybe it came to you via a parent who was too authoritarian, or a grandparent, or maybe it's just you because you're disagreeable and neurotic, and so you'll take or hyper-conscientious, you'll take yourself apart. Well, so you've got a problem. Something has objected to you. Then the question is, well, what does that mean? Well, maybe you're not looking at the world right. Maybe your goals are wrong. Maybe you're not acting properly. It's okay. So the question that arises when an obstacle emerges is, which part of this structure needs attention? And the first answer can't be all of it. Which is why when you're arguing with someone in an intimate relationship, and you're angry at them, and you want to win, which is a big mistake, you want to win, you say, well, this is what you're like. Here's another 10 examples of how you've done that in the past, and I can enumerate more of them if you'd like. And so that's actually what you're like, and I've tried fixing you and it didn't work, and so it looks like you're going to be like that up into the future, and you're basically saying to them, well, you're a bad person, and the only thing they can do is either collapse or punch you. And punching you is actually better than collapsing. You know what I mean? It's such a counterproductive way of arguing. You don't leave the person any out. And so maybe, well, they're civilized, so it doesn't get physical. Well, maybe that's good and maybe it isn't. But then they end up either really not happy with you in a way that they will manifest the first possible opportunity they get, or they have to go off in the corner and cringe. It's like, great, you won. It's like now your partner's either hates you or is cringing. It's great. That's a real good victory, man. Rack up about 100 victories like that, and you'll be in divorce court and spending $250,000 while being miserable about it. Yeah. So anyway, so something objects to you, and you think, okay, well, I need to take myself apart, right? Because there's a piece that's broken somewhere, and then you might think, well, let's assume it's a little piece to begin with. That's the right mechanism. It's like, okay, you got a C minus. That doesn't prove that you're stupid. Now it implies that you might be stupid, but it doesn't, right, really, it does, and that's why you don't want to look at it. Maybe it implies that you're lazy, or implies that you're ignorant, or like it implies all sorts of terrible. Might imply that you're a bad person even. But you don't want to leap to that, and that's sort of the proclamation of innocence before guilt. Assume that you're the least amount of reprehensible and ignorant possible. And so then you look at the micro routines. It's okay, well, I got a C minus in this course. Maybe I should study for that course 15 minutes more a day for the next 3 months. And then you ask yourself, do you think you could do that? No, I'm too useless. Okay, how about 15 minutes every second day? You think you could do that? You put it in your schedule, like 15 minutes every second day in the morning. And that's, well, you think, well, what's wrong with me? Well, I'm not very good at managing my study schedule. That's not quite down here at the behavioral level, but it's pretty close, because what you can take an action. You can open up your schedule and you can say, well, mark 15 minutes aside. Then you can practice doing that. It's pretty low level in the hierarchy. It means, well, you're still not a horrible person. You just got to polish up your work ethic. The thing is, whenever I look at a political movement, especially an ideological movement, I think, okay, there's a bunch of things you're for. Fine. What are you against? You know, because one of the things that people who adopt an ideological position like to presume is that all of the right is on their side. And that makes them very unconscious of their shadow, let's say, from a Jungian perspective. The Nazis had all sorts of positive reasons for what they were doing. But, you know, the negative reasons were there too, and you could easily make it a case that the negative reasons were really the reasons. And when I look at ideologues, I always think, yeah, that's what you're for, sure. But A, I don't believe all the good people are on your side. And B, I know that negative motivations are more powerful than positive ones. So you say you're for things, but you're against them too. So let's start with that. So I started thinking about this after I'd read George Orwell. I love George Orwell, by the way. How many of you know who George Orwell is? Wow, really? That's impressive. How many don't? Okay, well that's good. That's amazing. How the hell did you learn about George Orwell? Is it 1984 fundamentally, or Animal Farm?
Animal Farm.
Animal Farm. Okay, well that's good, because George Orwell, man, I tell you, George Orwell was the first Western intellectual who figured out what the hell was going on in the Soviet Union. And he did that in the mid-40s, early. You know, it was complicated because we sort of knew what was happening in the 20s and the 30s. You know, there was Lenin, and that wasn't so good. There was the Russian Civil War. There was the idea of universal communism. That wasn't such a good idea, you know, for as far as people who didn't want to be communist were concerned. And then there was what happened in the Ukraine in the 1930s. So it was like, yeah, you know, the evidence was starting to pile up. But unfortunately, what happened was the Spanish Civil War, and the lefties were pretty much the good guys in the Spanish Civil War, right? It was like a microcosm of the Second World War. The lefties were fighting the fascists, and some of the lefties were communists, but a lot of them were also people who were, I think, genuinely fighting for freedom. And a lot of North American literary figures went to Spain to fight on the side of the, you know, against the fascists. And so fair enough, you know, the fascists were obviously, you know, reprehensible, clearly. And so that kind of muddied the water, right? Because the fascists were bad, and then that sort of means that people that are fighting them, they're good, and some of them are communists, and there was pretty good reason for people to be radically socialist at that point in human history, because the plight of the working man was relatively unpleasant. George Orwell wrote a book called Road to Wigan Pier, and he went up to this town that was a coal mining town, and he stayed with the coal miners for a while and just looked at their life. So here's part of their life. So you basically work a 7.5-hour shift when you're a coal miner, and you think, oh, that's not too bad by 1930 standards. It's like, yeah, except you have to go down to the coal mine tunnels, you know, and like they're not 8 feet high and carpeted. They're like 4.5 feet high and rough and poorly lit, and the air is terrible. And so basically you have to chimp walk or crawl up to 3 miles just to get to work. And then you have to do that at the end of your shift. And you don't get paid for that. That's your commute. Right. So, you know, it was no bloody, well, and then of course what you're doing when you get there is like, it's absolutely filthy. It's unbelievably noisy. It's brutally difficult. He said that coal miners, they had no teeth because of their living conditions, but their bodies were absolutely perfect. They were unbelievably powerful and strong because all they did was incredibly intense physical labor. But it was bloody rough. And the housing those people had is like 50 families for one outhouse. That's probably good enough to describe it. And often they were row houses, and the row houses had no back doors. And they had no paths between them, and all the outhouses were at the back. So that meant if it was like 20 below and it was the winter and you were sick, then you get to go all the way around the block to your damn outhouse, or maybe there's only one there, and you line up with 50 people so that, you know, yeah, so. And Orwell was an upper class guy, basically, and he was trying to have himself overcome his upper class prejudices. And he was a real documentarian of the terrible working conditions of working class people. And he wrote this book called Road to Wigan Pier. But one of the things that Orwell said, he wrote this story about these poor goddamn coal miners, and you think, well, yeah, it's like, how about some social legislation so that these people and their children aren't just absolutely brutalized non-stop, you know? But then he wrote the last half of the book, and he wrote it for the Left Book Club, which was a socialist group that would publish a book every month or so. And what he did was he wrote a critique of socialism, of British socialism. And he said, yeah, well, this sucks, man. It's like we should be on the side of these working people, but the socialists I meet, they're not on the side of the working people. They're like tweed-wearing, middle-class, hyper-intellectuals who never go anywhere near the working class because of their class prejudices and for all sorts of other reasons. And they don't like the poor at all. They just hate the rich. And I thought, I had been a member of the NDP for a long time at that point. There was always something a little off about it, especially the more radical end. I thought, what's with you guys? Like, it doesn't look like benevolence as far as I can tell. There's a lot of whining and complaining and resentment. It's like, what's that about? I read Orwell and I thought, aha, right. If you hate the successful, if you hate the rich, rich, by the way, is whoever has more money than you. That's how you define rich. And the best way to mask your resentment is to pretend that you're on the side of the poor. And I read that and I thought, that's exactly right. And then that's part of also what made me psychoanalytically oriented. Because one thing psychoanalysts always do, always, is if you say here's how I'm positively predisposed, the psychoanalyst says, how are you using that to mask something easy and malevolent that you're doing? And that's a very, very useful question. It's not always correct, right? But it's correct a lot more than people generally like to think. You know, it's like the mother or the witch in Hansel and Gretel. You know the story, right? This guy gets married, he's got a couple of kids, his new wife doesn't really like the kids. You have 100 times higher chance, by the way, of being abused by a step-parent than a biological parent, just so you know. So the stepmother doesn't like the kids. She tells the guy, well, why don't you just go put those kids out in the woods? So they go out in the woods. So they're lost kids, right? They have nowhere to go. So they're wandering around out there in the forest. And what happens? And they come across a gingerbread house. You think, wow, man, you're a starving kid. Gingerbread house. That's good news, right? Not only is it a house, but it's made out of candy. How could anything possibly be any better? So in they go. Well, and then there's this grandmotherly type in there, and you know, she starts to fatten them up, and she puts, I think it's Hansel in a cage, and she gets Gretel after a while to basically work as their scullery maid, and it becomes quite obvious to the children that she's actually fattening them up so that she can put them in the oven and eat them. And so I think what Hansel does is, I think Gretel gives him this like bone from some animal, and the old witch is half blind, and every time she reaches in to sort of feel his leg, he gives her the bone, and so like she's just not all that interested in eating him. And anyways, the kids end up pushing her in the oven and closing it and getting the hell out of there. So, you know, it's a happy ending as far as fairy tales go. But it's an Oedipal story, right? It's a classic story about an Oedipal family. Be bloody wary of people who do too much for you. Right. It's like if you have a mother, or any other relative for that matter, who's fattening you up on mercy and candy, the probability that her basic goal is to eat you enough so that you never leave, the probability is extraordinarily high. And that's no joke. You know, one of the things that you do learn if you read about the sorts of people who burst out of their mother's basement and go shoot up Dawson College is that often that's exactly the situation they've been in. Right? They're burning with resentment in their uselessness down in the basement for 5 or 6 years. You know, they don't have to leave. They don't have to become independent. Everything's done for them. So they never have to do anything for themselves. It's like, it's not pretty. And so one of the rules for dealing with people, and I know this is actually a rule for dealing with elderly people in homes for retired people, is do not do anything for anyone they can do for themselves. You're stealing from them when you do that. And it's a great rule of thumb for kids. Like, once they can dress themselves, they dress themselves. If they can set the table, even if it takes 20 minutes, it's like they're setting the table. You're not doing them a favor by helping them do anything they can do themselves. And it's kind of harsh, you know, but it beats the hell out of the witch in Hansel and Gretel. So anyways, you know, one of the things we're going to look at as well is the dark side of positive motivations. A book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts that was written by a bunch of engineers at Google, and they were looking at billions of Google searches. And you know, there's no shortage of pornography on the internet. And there's much less by proportion than there was when the internet was first invented. And it's so interesting because it actually turned out that one of the things that drove the development of the internet and the technology was the proclivity of young men to search out sexually provocative images. That was what was at the forefront of the development of the net. It's extraordinarily interesting. They were motivated to use it for that purpose, and that provided the platform from which it emerged. Amazing. Anyways, the Google engineers looked at pornographic search processes and then segregated male searches from female searches, and what they found was that the males searched out images. Surprise, surprise, no one considers that, you know, particularly interesting, but the females searched out literary representations of pornography. It was written. And so I can give you an example of that. If you know about Harlequin romances, does everybody still know about those? Anybody not know about those? Okay, well, they're mass market romances, and of a very stereotypical type. And the original ones were pretty harmless in terms of no violence and no real sexual content. But that was 40 years ago, and they've differentiated tremendously, and now there's hardcore Harlequin romances, and with particularly garish covers, and then there's the old, you know, more tame, basic, sexless and aggressionless romances where everything is implied and not explicit, but the explicit ones exist. So they did a plot analysis of the typical pornographic female fantasy. Well, and it's so comical because engineers did this, and social scientists would never do this because they'd be probably too concerned about the ethics of it or some damn thing. But engineers, you know, they'll just plow ahead with no concern whatsoever for such things, and they actually discover things that way. And so they discovered the basic plot of the female pornographic literary product. And they identified, so basically what happened was that a innocent, well-meaning, and attractive young woman encounters a male who's a bit of a monster. And the monster, there's 5 types of classic male monster. For all you males who want to know, this is what you can become. Vampire, that's a good one. Werewolf, billionaire, pirate, and surgeon. Okay, so that's very interesting because, well, first of all, there's a dominance thing. Now you're actually blushing, you know, you're actually blushing about that. That's very, very funny. So, sorry to point it out, but it's so comical, you know. I know, it's so funny. I was reading this, it was just cracking me up. I thought, oh my God, really? Pirate, vampire, oh, that explains it. What about all these damn vampire shows, right? They're so popular online, they're so popular on Netflix. Oh yes, and then there's the werewolf. There's nothing sexier than a werewolf, apparently. But I mean, so there's predatory dominance that's implicit in that, right? With the billionaire, it's more abstract, but clearly that's an indication of very high success in the male dominance hierarchy. So, but there's this desire for aggression that's in that, a real aggression. Right? And it's not surprising to me at all. It makes perfect sense. But the basic plot is that the woman encounters this mysterious and aggressive male and tames him. That's the female hero myth, as far as I can tell. It's Beauty and the Beast. And so it's because, well, there's no fun in taming someone who's already tame. And what makes you think you really want someone who's tame anyways? There's no interest in that. Plus, when chaos manifests itself, what makes you think that someone tame is going to be good for anything? And it's a real question. And so that aggression is absolutely vital. It's absolutely necessary. But because it's incredibly dangerous, which of course it is, it has to be civilized. And so what happens is that the archetypal female in these pornographic romances seduces and tames the aggressive male. And that's her encounter with chaos. Now it's more complicated. Of course, females, they're more complicated, and that's exactly how it is. And it's no wonder because their lives are more complicated. But